Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to this live stream. Really excited to be here. We're going to talk about a lot of fun stuff today, from speed writing to my template, some of the workflows and mindsets when you're sketching and speed writing, building out track structures, as well as my new course that just launched. So a lot of fun stuff. Please let me know in the chat where you're tuning in from. It's really cool to see where everyone is. And if I'm looking down at the phone, it's because I'm keeping an eye on the chat, looking for questions. You can, of course, give some requests for things to look at in this template, or things for me to explain, or any questions at all. And yeah, I have a template in front of me here that or a project that I want to look at a little bit during the stream as well, when we're talking about my sketching and speed writing principles. And yeah, I'm really curious to kind of dig into some of the details here. I've shared some of these on on our YouTube channel, and it's been a lot of really good questions. I want to address some of them, and let me know if there's anything, as we go through this, that you guys would like to see. So first of all, how many of you have been trying to incorporate speed writing or sketching into your workflow in some way? And by speed writing or sketching, I essentially mean not working with a massive template, working at a lot of details all at once, but more focusing on kind of broad strokes, painting with broad strokes, essentially if you were sketching a painting with pen and paper or a pencil, instead of getting super granular and detailed. I'm curious to know how many are kind of familiar with this way of working. And yeah, it was Walid's birthday yesterday, so everyone say happy birthday to Walid. See, we got people from Greece, from Italy, from Germany, France, Canada. Amazing. I'm in Norway right now myself. We just drove on Sunday. We drove down 13 hours across the country. It's a pretty big country, even though it doesn't look like that on the map. All the way down to the south to go record an album in a studio. So we're on the day 5 right now of 6 days of tracking an album with a rock band of a lot of my best friends here in Norway. And it's been a lot of 12-hour days, but a lot of fun. So I've really been enjoying it. And of course, let me know if you can hear me clearly. I apologize for not having a really great audio setup here, because I'm literally just my laptop in this studio session. I just escaped the main room to go to the B studio, the mixing room, to do this. But I hope it's you can hear me clearly. And let me just quickly do a little sound check to make sure that you can hear also the Ableton audio. And let me know if anything is too loud or too soft, or you can't really hear me. I will try to not speak while the music is playing too much and pace myself a little bit. So let me just play a little bit of this. Let me know if you guys can hear that, if you can hear me speak, and if anything should be louder or quieter. Now we'll adjust accordingly. See, we got Seattle, India, Sweden. Perfect. Sergio, do you mean Ableton needs to be louder? I have it down quite a lot, so I can boost it a bit. Let me know if you can hear that. Hopefully it's not mono. Try the headphones. If not, I'm gonna try to fix that. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about speed writing. So first of all, I want to look at kind of why should you do it, and why is it a great practice. In one way, it makes it very easy to validate ideas very quickly without spending too much time on them. Because isn't that one of the worst things, is when you put a lot of hours into a piece of work and then you eventually hit a roadblock and you're not really sure if you enjoy the idea at all anymore, if it's any good, and you just scrap it and you feel like you just wasted a lot of time. That's one of the things I enjoy with this kind of working when it comes to sketching and broad strokes and speedwriting is that it helps you validate an idea very quickly. You only need to spend a few minutes, maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes to figure out if this is something you want to pursue and develop into a full track. That's something I looked at in the recent YouTube video that I uploaded about a week ago, looking at how I took the sketch that I made in 5 to 10 minutes, just improvising 3 or 4 layers. And those 4 layers essentially informed the decisions that I was making on the detail level and for the full orchestration based on those 4 initial tracks. And I didn't invest a lot of time before I knew if I wanted to pursue the idea or not. So that's one of the great things. And another thing is that it forces you to simplify, which makes the ideas a lot easier to build out and turn into full tracks. Because in my opinion, it's harder to build out an 8-bar loop that has 64 tracks perfectly mixed with a bunch of automation and effect on it, and try to turn that into a full track than something that is a bit simpler, maybe 3 to 10 tracks, and then it's just less to deal with, less to kind of navigate and move around in blocks and so on. Let me know if you agree, or if you had the same experience where you start an idea and maybe you're working on the loop or an intro and you dial everything in, every little detail, the EQ, the reverb, and then you get stuck. That's happened to me a lot, at least. And working in this way is definitely one way to that helps me a lot, avoiding getting stuck like that, because it forces me to simplify, and that again helps me sketch out the whole composition a lot easier. I see some of the audio is in mono. Let me have a quick look inside of Loopback here. It's a little bit of a interesting setup. Let me see if this... Let me know if that turned the audio all the way off, because sometimes there's a weird glitch where this faces or cancels the face of itself out. But let me know if you can hear that or if that went away. Because I want to make sure that you can hear as well as possible. It's not going to be life or death, but it's really going to help if you can hear a bit more of the nuances and everything I do here. I definitely want this to be the best audio quality possible. So Dogbloods is asking, how much emphasis do I place on quantity? Do I typically generate 10 different ideas and then go back to select the strongest one? Yeah, a lot of times I do that. Sometimes I don't. Like when I wrote these, I kind of have the same mentality where I'm starting them as if I'm ready to go 10 ideas deep. If the first one shows promise, then I just keep going with that. If not, I try another one, and then I play around with that a little bit. And if that doesn't seem like something that's worth pursuing, then I keep going. That's one way of doing it. Other times I actually deliberately just create 8 ideas in an evening. And a lot of times number 8 has been the one. I remember sessions in LA when I was living with my roommate over there, and he would just sit in a room and I would just create one beat, then another one, then a quick track in different styles, different genres. And all of a sudden I end up on beat number 6 or track number 7 with the one that ends up getting placed and getting published, because it instantly has something. And the thing, I never look at the first 7 as a waste of time or as failed or anything like that. They were just stepping stones to getting to the one that is essential. So I think quantity can be good in a lot of situations, not just in and of itself, because more isn't more. It's not about just getting as many ideas out as possible. But I do believe that not being afraid to just dive into a lot of different ideas and exploring a lot of different ideas, and not feeling married to one idea, and not feeling like you have to make this idea an absolute masterpiece. If not, you have failed the entire day and the entire session. I think that kind of mindset is very important. So I hope that answers the question. Sometimes I do deliberately, just try to create a lot and then don't feel attached to it. And then I come back the next day and I listen to them again and see what kind of appeals to me. And even in the course I just released, I'm creating, I think, 6 or 7 ideas in the third module, which is the idea generation module, because I have 6 different ways of coming up with ideas. Some of them are called the alchemist, the philosopher, the minimalist, and so on. And there are different frameworks for coming up with ideas. Some of them are more um, analytical or pragmatic in the way that I go about things, structuring motifs and so on. Some of them are more kind of improvisation based. I mean, some of them are based around limitations and so on. So I made a lot of different ideas, and actually, as I was making them, I sometimes feel differently than when I go back and revisit them later. So even in that course, I made 6, 7 ideas, and I thought I knew which ones I wanted to pursue later. But then the next day, when I went back and listened to it, I actually wanted to turn one of the ideas that I actually almost disregarded earlier into full track, because all of a sudden that spoke to me. So we feel differently day to day. I'm sure you guys have felt that as well. You make something that you feel is great one day, and then next day you wake up and you don't, it sounds terrible, or you don't even know what you were thinking the day before. Maybe you've had the opposite experience as well, where something doesn't sound that great one day, and maybe the next day it sounds great. We literally listened to something down in a studio that we made 4 years ago, I think, in Australia, and we're just wondering, why didn't we put this out? Why didn't we do anything with this? Because it sounds incredible. We don't know really what we were thinking in the way that we were downplaying the idea. So it goes both ways, I think. And as well, it is mentioning here in the chat, I see as well, it's very similar when speed painting with art. Thumbnails, ideas, sketches. It's a lot of fun, and also it forces you to kind of find the essence of what you're working with, and not just find the essence in that specific piece, but also in your craft, trying to focus on what's the first principles, what's the essential pillars of trying to convey something with the medium, whether it's, you know, painting, art, or anything like that. So in a bit, I'm gonna have a little look at trying to fix the audio issue. I'm not 100% sure what the problem is, but we're gonna try to get to the bottom of that. Stavros says, I have a sketching template, find it very useful to 5 to 8 VSTs just to record the main idea, then try to add as much as I can as to develop the main idea as possible. Yeah, I think that's a great approach. That's pretty much what I've been doing for many years. Recently, I've started kind of expanding my sketching templates where they're a little bit bigger. If you've seen some of my earlier videos or content on sketching, such as my orchestral sketching course, there I was a lot more minimalist. I had maybe 5 to 8 tracks in the project. Now it's a little bit more spread out, but it's a very similar principle. It's just a little bit more natural and flexible this way. Not as processed, and a little bit easier, I find, in terms of now that I've gotten to very used to working in this way with sketching. I find this way of working really well, which is still a very boiled down version of my full template. So a lot of the principles are the same: avoiding getting overwhelmed, limiting the amount of decision making I have to do, and just getting straight to the creative part without having to set anything up. I'm going to talk about how I set these templates up and some challenges and things that you can do to create similar templates in a little bit, but we're going to get to that. Going to read through some of the comments really quickly. Yeah, see. Quantity is a quality of its own. That's actually, yeah, really good point. It's very true. I don't really believe in the whole quality versus quantity thing. I don't think they're oppositions at all. And I do think quality gets a little bit of a bad rap. I think it was Carell or something, one of my friends, who mentioned the other day they had heard someone talk about, can't remember if it was pottery or ceramics or painting, but the question was, if someone spends a whole month painting, 20 pictures or 20 paintings versus spending a whole month just trying to perfect one painting, who do you think is going to progress the most? And who do you think is going to be a better painter compared to where they started in a whole month from now? I think quantity, when it comes to learning and growing and exploring things, is really important. It's not about getting something perfect when you're starting out. Even when you're progressing and you already have some experience, you still need to get those reps in. No one is getting really jacked by doing one perfect workout. It's better to do, one kind of 70% ideal workout that kind of works, a few times a week for 3 years than doing the absolute perfect scientific workout 4 times. Quantity is really great, and consistency is the king of them all, I think. So another thing that is really great when it comes to sketching or speed writing, kind of similar terms, helps you with practicing the skill of kind of going with the flow as we speak about quantity, not really putting too much emphasis on anything having to be perfect and not really thinking too much. Ideally, you want making music to be more like driving a car. In the beginning, when you're learning how to drive a car, you're thinking about, especially if you're driving a stick, which we did here in Norway when I grew up, you think of every movement, the clutch, the stick, the gear, and you try to time the gas pedal right, and then you try to figure out how on earth you're going to do the brakes without killing the car. And in the beginning, it's mayhem. Like, you're trying to juggle all of these different things and then also not kill people and pedestrians in traffic, and also try to keep the car going and obeying the rules of traffic and reading the signs and figuring out where to go. It's a lot to handle all at once. But after you've done it for a while, you don't even think about the actual movements or theory or things that you're doing. You're just driving. You're focusing on the end destination, and the vehicle and the skills that getting you there is just second nature. Ideally, you kind of want music to become like that. That's what Ansha Rossman, I had a conversation briefly with him about creativity, and he also thought inspiration is a little bit of a myth, and you need to not rely on it and try to make it as second nature as possible, almost like speaking. And that comes with repetition, and it comes also with not overthinking every single word that you speak before you say it, musically speaking. So I think speedwriting is great because it puts you out of the perfectionist mindset that everything has to be great every step of the way. When I'm writing sketches like these and the ones that I shared earlier, I'm starting with one layer. These last two has been chords, and it doesn't sound great at all when I'm beginning. I'm just doing 3 minutes of just stream of consciousness. I'm just starting with chords. It sounds mediocre at best, but I don't really care. I see it as just putting the reps in, and I also have the mindset of curiosity. I want to see, if I keep going with this, where will it take me? And I'm not really that attached to the outcome. Whether it's incredible or if it's horrible, it doesn't really matter, because either way, I will have learned something, but also it might just be something great at the end of it. And I think that is also a very important mindset, because being too attached to every chord you put down, having to be a part of some masterpiece that you think it's going to become, it's going to narrow your way of thinking, and it's going to keep you close to a lot of great ideas and to explore things deeply enough to where you get to the gold. You're going to stop right before you get to the best parts. I'm going to show you some examples of this in a little bit in this project as well. So it's a really great way to get reps in. If you think about it in terms of exercise or gym or anything, really, everything is about repetition, consistency, and again, quantity, I think. And so I don't think this is also a black or white thing with you should only work this way. This is the only way to make music. Absolutely not. I think this is just one thing that is great to incorporate into your routine or your practice routine or creative habits, because there's a lot of benefits to it. And it's a really great way to come up with and explore ideas and sketch things out. But it's just one way of making music, one way of practicing it, and one way of practicing certain skills. So, yeah, I'm not trying to sell anyone that this is the only way to work, for sure. Vittori says, building a structure with a few elements can be effective. However, when using a limited number of orchestral tracks, I worry about how each sample's strengths and weaknesses can influence my writing. That's a good point. If you don't have great sample libraries, that can definitely, like, those faults will stick out even more. These days, a lot of sample libraries are pretty good, and I definitely relate to that issue though, but I still feel that there's a lot you can do with the writing, with orchestration, with the processing to get a lot of sample libraries to sound really great It's a lot about how we're using them. And I do think that sketching and speed painting and narrowing down like the minimalism is a great way to expose some of the weak points that we might have in our arranging or in our compositions or in our productions, because it makes it impossible to hide behind any flaws, and it makes it easier to see where the weak points are so we can actually work on them and uh, fix them on a fundamental level instead of having too many details to worry about, which is great. But as Vittorio says, there's a risk of being limited by the library's constraints or falling into overthinking when experimenting with various sketching templates. What are your strategies for handling this? Well, there's a few. I'm going to get into some of them a little bit later. Um, there's definitely a constraint with libraries in general because I don't have a violin right here, which I would in my studio. But when you're playing a live instrument, or when anyone is playing a live instrument, articulations don't exist in the same way that they do when we're working with libraries, where they are in a list in our library. There are decisions that we have to actively switch in between. Articulations when playing music is kind of like driving a car. You just do the blinking while you're turning, and it's all a part of just the flow of things. So when you're playing the violin, you seamlessly switch in between a legato note going into a staccato, going into a marcato, and then maybe a glissando that turns into a quick few staccato notes that then goes into a lyrical legato melody. It's all very seamless and flowing together. And one thing with libraries is that they can kind of limit you into maybe one articulation if you have a sketching template with limited tracks. That's what I love with Pacific Strings, by the way. I don't think I have that track or those articulations here, but I've used them a lot, which is the marcatos, which kind of is a mix of a staccato if you do quick notes. They can also be long sustained chords, and you have a lot of playability. Same with the Pacific brass horns here. Depending on how long or short the notes are, they kind of switch the articulation more like an actual player, which makes it less constrained. So there are definitely constraints like that, but I do feel there's ways to overcome that, and a lot of it starts with understanding how the real instruments play, and then setting up a template that's as open to kind of exploring the range of the instrument as possible. It could be through racks inside of Ableton with different key switches, velocity, or chains, or key switches within a library, or libraries that kind of have a bit more versatility to it, like the Pacific series. But that's definitely a really good point. I also set up different sketching templates for different styles or different things. So this one is definitely a more lyrical Lord of the Rings, John Williams style template. And I might as well just get into this now. I was going to look at this later, kind of how I set these up. And it's a 4-part process. And this is a challenge I really recommend that you do as well. So number one is find a piece of music that you really enjoy the sound of, or that you want to learn something from. This could be a John Williams score. It could be anything. Once you've found that, find a part of it that's going to be not something that will take you a whole month to try to recreate, but recreate a 10-second or 5-second or 16-bar excerpt of that track, and then try to get it as close as you can. Now, this is very hard. For this template, I actually did this with a Blake's video with Pacific Strings, and I recreated as close as I could, try to get the string balance right. And I focus on one thing. That's another thing I want to mention. If you're doing recreations, try to set an intention for it. Don't just try to create everything one-to-one. I mean, you could. It's just going to take a lot more time, and depending on what you want to learn, it might or might not be the best thing to do. You will learn a lot from doing that, but it's not always necessary. Sometimes it's nice to have a intention of what you want to focus on if you have to compromise on time. So you could spend, say, 1 or 2 days or one afternoon doing as much as you can, focusing on getting, say, the string balance from this track right. Or maybe you love the woodwinds or the brass in a specific piece. Try to recreate it, and don't worry too much about the other things being absolutely perfect. Maybe it's the percussion that you kind of leave out a little bit because you're not that worried about the percussion of that piece. You're really trying to focus on the brass, the articulations, the balance of the brass, and try to get as close as possible. It's going to learn you or show you and teach you a lot about the orchestration, the composition of that piece. But you're also going to have kind of a template that is already set up for you a little bit. Now, once you've gotten to a place where it's pretty close, or as close as you can get, at one point we have to throw in the towel and say, this is the best we can do, especially if we're trying to um, recreate a real orchestra with samples. Then it's really kind of hard to get it as close as we would like to, unless you're Blakes. His mockups are insane. If you do that and you get to a place where you're happy with it, then save it and then delete everything. Now, the next thing that I like to do then is use that template to create something in a similar vein as the original reference. And then, once you have gotten that kind of to a good point, start tweaking the EQ, the processing, and dial it in to kind of suit your personal style. And once you've done that, then the next part comes, which is actually deleting it again. And then I try to limit it to the most essential instruments. You can save the whole thing as one template, but once that is done, I would try to limit it a little bit and make it very easy to kind of navigate. And then that becomes kind of the sketching template, and that is for a specific style with a specific intention. So you can have several different sketching templates with different strengths and different sounds, because this is not what I would probably use for a very hybrid, intense synth Hans Zimmer score, but it's really good for more lyrical Ravel, John Williams-esque compositions. Let me know if all this is making sense. I'm just going to take a quick second to look through some of these comments and questions here. Frank William is asking, what do you guys think of Air Verb by Spitfire? I have not looked into it yet. I'm trying to kind of get the most out of what I already have, and recently I've been exploring Cinematic Rooms Professional quite a bit in terms of reverbs, and also what's called 2CB2, which is very resource heavy, but those are really great reverbs. I'm curious to hear if anyone has used that, because Air is absolute legendary hall. My template for epic music, Adrian, it's kind of now similar to this, just more brass. I could try to open up one right now, but I don't actually have one that is too recent, because I haven't been making anything that is at least what I would consider like super complex epic music with a lot of synths, a lot of big percussion. So I don't have a template set up, but I'm actually working on one right now, so I might make a video in a little bit, but a lot of it is pretty similar. It's just, of course, a lot more complex, but I also want to make sure that I don't overload whatever is going on here with the stream as well. But I might look at some more things like that later. Stavros says, you have to be creative even when learning. Yeah, for sure. I think doing and creating things is the best way to learn by far. Because you learn so much by just making these little sketches. Every time I'm doing a recreation of something or creating one sketch, I learn something new. Like the track that I uploaded to YouTube and did a breakdown of, I learned so much about creating woodwind textures just by making that thing, more than I probably could by, just reading a book or something like that. And Dog Bloods is asking if I've checked out Nick Mira. He does beat challenges where he creates a complete beat in just 5 minutes. Also offers some really interesting perspectives on creativity. Yeah, I know of Nick Mira. Haven't watched his videos much recently. A few months ago, some of his popped up, but I remember I watched some of his things a few years ago when he started to really pop off. He has some really great videos, and I really like his mindset as well. He's talking a lot about that, similar things when it comes to not really overthinking things and going with the flow, focusing on just creating things without trying to be convinced each one is going to be a hit. And he's got so many hits under his belt, and I really just like his way of thinking. So it's a very different style of music, but a lot of these principles are very universal, I think. Barry Walsh is saying, notice you seem to migrate back between Ableton and Cubase, and if I have a favorite, yeah, most of my older courses are from Cubase because Cubase is what I used to work in all the time, and then eventually I started dabbling in Ableton, and eventually made a full-time switch over to Ableton. And there's a lot of things I do miss in Cubase, especially when it comes to uh, navigating a lot of MIDI information all at once. But all in all, I have Cubase. I got the latest one, or I guess 14 just came out, but I have 13. I've been trying to set up a template in it and keep going with it and use it because there's so many benefits that I do miss in terms of big MIDI projects. But I'm just so fast and so good at just doing things quickly in Ableton now when it comes to everything, including the production and mixing, especially working with audio, chopping it up, pitching it, reversing it, and doing sound design on the fly. So I just can't really go back to Cubase anymore. Brainform is asking if I use hardware stuff to navigate my DAW, some wheels, mixers. I used to have a lot of things, a lot of gear. These days, I do most of my work just. I don't even have an external monitor. I just work on my laptop because I bring it around a lot and I bounce around quite a bit. And also, I figured out like I didn't feel like any of those external things made me that much faster in the long run. Personally, it was kind of a little bit of a distraction at times, but I know a lot of people swear by them, especially different faders and so on. I just essentially use the ones that I have on my keyboards, and I have a few different ones that have some sliders and faders, although they're a little bit too small. So the only things I would maybe recommend or want to get would be a really good kind of four fader controller. That would be kind of nice, but I'm kind of okay with the just using the mod wheel on my keyboard and then going in with the mouse after and kind of doing the details this way. You see, it's kind of rough like this in the sketching. Then I go in and I just enable and delete like this in between, so it becomes a little bit of a smoother curve. But you can see this is all done very quickly in the sketching. I'll do a playthrough and dive into some of this in a little second. And I apologize if the audio is a little bit compromised in terms of being mono. I will do my best to see if there's anything I can do to fix it, but it's usually working pretty fine, but sometimes it acts up a little bit. And Barry Walsh says so true. Oh yeah, the Evenant templates tutorials that Ansha has set up is really good when it comes to getting a really good routing, and it's a really good kind of base for templates of all sizes, no matter how you put it together. So those are some really great videos. Ansha has a lot of great content, and I love his way of breaking down complex principles like orchestration into um, very minimal and understandable processes. And GCG says, "Are you actually friends with Alex McCullough?" Yeah, I've known Alex for a lot of years now. Both me and Walid, we met him for the first time in we were traveling together in Berlin. Must have been 2015, I think. So known him for almost 10 years. Alex McCullough is incredible, super talented. Frank William asked what made me switch over from Ableton to Cubase, and um, I think it was just a few things really. First of all, is the way that I can actually work with loops and more in a live performance way, because I've always been a musician at heart and an instrumentalist. So I have a lot of live instruments in my studio, and I've always liked jamming and playing. I grew up playing in bands, in orchestras, and jamming with other people. And Ableton allowed me to use that kind of workflow and way of working in the DAW and turn that into full track structures really quickly. That was one of the big appeals. And then I love the fact that I have these very visual chains of effects down here instead of having them hidden kind of over in the left. Much more intuitive for me. And second, the audio editing capabilities in Ableton are absolutely nuts. It's incredible. And since I've been working with a lot of different styles and more sound designy things with Joshua Crispin, a lot of different projects where we're doing sound design for things, and all kinds of genres from electronic music to hip hop to pop, recording lots of audio and manipulating that. Ableton to me has just been far superior and a much more friendly workflow, in my personal opinion. But all of this is just personal preference, really. There's pros and cons with everything, and even to a library. And Barry Walsh says Oxygen 49. Yeah, the Oxygen 49 keyboard and similar keyboards that has some faders that you can program for expression and volumes modulations, they're a great choice. They're just a little bit small, so you can't do the most minute kind of changes, but they definitely get the job done. And Dogblood says, video content idea, try to make a song / idea in Bitwig as a complete beginner. Really goes along with doing and creating. It's the best way to learn. Yeah, I've actually been wanting to do something like that. At least getting into Bitwig. I have always been put on my radar quite recently, and it seems very, very aligned with the way that I like to work. And Peter Tomlinson says, "Are you gonna go to the Ghostwriter composer meetup?" No, I'm in Norway with Walid for a little while. I've been I was living in LA for a while and just came over here after summer. I'm gonna go back, but not in, I think, probably before after New Year's. So that's not gonna happen for me. I'm gonna stay over here because I have a lot of projects to finish on this end, and then I'm gonna try to relax a little bit as well before Christmas, because it's been a pretty hectic year, a lot of traveling. And Barry says, the Evenant courses are great. Thanks very much. I appreciate it. I'm happy you enjoy them. And yeah, the sound design workflow is really great in Ableton. Way better than Cubase. And I tried to go back recently. I've tried several times, but it's not really just doing it for me. So one more thing I just want to talk about before I try to dive into this, and we'll see if the audio is okay, but I'm going to at least show you the most important principles. The audio is not as important right now. I wanted to say that apart from the perks and benefits of being able to go through things quickly, not getting too attached to things, there's one big reason I think this way of working and sketching and speed writing is incredible, and it's that it teaches you the art of minimalism, because you're forced to do more with less. And how many of you here have seen the video uploaded on YouTube about a week ago breaking down the track, where I did break down the sketch that I made with just 4 elements, and those 4 elements just guided every single decision essentially in the full orchestration, down to the production and everything that I was doing. And I think this is super important, or at least very helpful working this way, because it forces you to think minimalistic. And I think the best skill is not knowing how to add the most amount of things possible to something, but it's really knowing how much can you take away without losing what's essential. And I think minimalism is one of the best teachers. I've mentioned this before as well a little bit, but if you try to go with a minimal template or try to sketch out an idea, even just on the piano, and you feel something is lacking, it's a very telling thing, because you can pinpoint very easily what the problem is if you just have a few elements. Is it the melody that's not strong enough? Is it the chords that's too boring? Is it the fact that there's no depth or foreground, middle ground, and background in the composition? All of those things are a lot easier to kind of pinpoint if you have a sketch. For example, I think I do have some thumbnails and design things open here from some old Evenant articles. If you look at these outlines here, this is pretty much 80% of the finished result. It's very, very rough, but this is the least amount of painting that has to be done in order to convey what this is. And then later you see some of the workflow to add some lighting and then some texture to creating these characters. And this is very similar to the way that I look at sketching and why I think it's great. Even when it comes to environments, when it comes to storyboards or even creatures, this is the beginning of something that's going to become this, and this is going to be the start of this. And when you try to do something with very little and it doesn't really work as well as you maybe want it to, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of pinpoint exactly where it is. Is it the chord voicings? Is it the amount of layers? Is it too busy? Is there some clashing? Because when you have a project with, say, 30, 40, 50 tracks, or even 100 tracks, there's so many potential places where something could have gone wrong that it might be hard to figure out where is the exact problem, not just in that specific track, but in your skill sets or in your way of working or approaching things or in your knowledge. When you're sketching, it becomes a lot easier to kind of figure out, oh, this is consistently becoming a problem for me. Maybe I should learn more about this and then work on those core pillars. So that's a really great benefit of doing this as an exercise. And also because when you have fewer elements to work with, you have to make the most out of each element. For example, when I have just 4 tracks and I have one that is some flute arpeggios, one that is a melody, and one that is some chords, and maybe one counter melody, I have to make sure that the melody is the best melody that it can be for that idea, and the chords are doing the most they can to support that melody, and that the woodwind runs in the background, not just some lazy few notes, but they actually fill that space and they drive the piece forward. And I have to put more effort and attention and care into each element. And this helps you make sure that every element in your track or in your idea are stronger. And it also forces you to then, if you figure out, oh, I struggle with making these backgrounds strong, then you can learn how to do that and practice it in a sketch form 50 times. Instead of being frustrated not knowing where to begin, you can just get some repetition on that and then move on, essentially. Now, let me just play through this track really quickly, at least a part of it. I'm going to talk just really quickly about how I go about creating these sketches and some of these principles I just talk about, how I keep them in mind when I'm working like this. Let's go. Okay, so that's an excerpt of a little improvised sketch that I did a few days ago. Kind of a similar time to when I did the one that I did a breakdown of on YouTube. They're kind of similar. This one is arguably a bit more inspired by The Lord of the Rings, because I'm listening to the audiobooks right now every morning and every night before going to bed. And I just decided to play around with a few chords inspired by the soundtrack. And you can definitely tell which theme from the Lord of the Rings this is taken from. So the way that I made this whole thing is I started with these chords. This became kind of the foundation, and there's nothing special about this. It sounds like the Lord of the Rings score order from Temu or something. But I decided to just go with it and just record everything. I think I had a click track going because I see everything is to the grid. Sometimes I don't even have a click track at all and I just improvise. It's not as recommended because it's a pain to edit afterwards. But I just kept going with some chords, just keeping the click track. And the principle that I go by when I'm doing this kind of explorations and sketches is that I just keep going no matter what. I'm literally improvising some chords, and whatever comes out, I have to go with it. That's one of the parts of the game, which is a really fun challenge. Also a little terrifying, but it's a great challenge. Both because it forces you to think quickly and just make a decision. Second, because it makes you not as attached to any outcome, and you realize that actually sometimes making something mediocre or even bad is the stepping stone or pathway to making something great. So it started with these chords. Those are some of the first kind of Lord of the Rings chords, and then I went to another chord progression from Lord of the Rings, which is another chromatic mediant. Oh, actually, this is something different. So as I'm playing this, I'm just playing those two chords, I'm repeating it, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. Then I'm going to another chord, trying to get out of this thing and back into something. And at this point, I'm just moving around harmonically. I'm not really sure where I'm going. And then I get to a major chord and I realize I can do what I did in the beginning again in this key. And then I went back to the quicker tempo. I realized, wait, I'm going halftime right now. This was supposed to be faster, so I just played it faster. And here I all of a sudden just heard a chord change going to the minor, which I did in the chords first. Then the bass. Then I think I want to do a major. Yeah. Then I went to chromatic mediant. And as I did that, I heard a little bit of a string melody in my head as I went through the second pass over, and it became my favorite part of the track, which is this theme. And this theme would never have existed if I didn't go all the way through with this, which I could care less about. It's completely okay at best. It's, you know, just playing around with Lord of the Rings chords, doing some melodies over it. But then from going through with that, not just deleting it or starting to overthink it or just starting over, but pushing through and just seeing what lies on the other end if I just keep going with this, I stumble upon this theme that just came out of nowhere from pushing through with these and going off the momentum of the stepping stones of the previous ideas. And that is a great thing that's happened so many times when I'm composing. Before, I would be very harsh and critical and judgmental of my ideas very early, and if they didn't show a certain promise, I would just delete them. But over time, I've realized that a lot of those not as great starting points are some of the best stepping stones into something that you really like. And that's been a big realization for me. I'm not sure if you guys have had any similar experiences. If so, let me know in the chat. I'm curious to hear. So after that, I came to my second, or actually, that's a little bit of a lie. This is honestly chopped down a little bit because I wanted to make it a bit shorter for this video. There was another repetition, I think, of the main theme. Or maybe not. No, actually, I chopped out one of the parts here, I think. regardless, I came to this part. All of these main melodies came from the same sketch. I think if I go here and maybe copy this over and try to recreate the bare bones of the sketch really quickly for you. Let me take away this cello solo. It's just doubling the cello, not essential. Take away this violin solo. Let me just stretch out. Oops, I've done something stupid again. There we go. I'm just going to stretch out this violin. Oh, actually, this is what it was supposed to be. So when I started the idea, it usually starts with just chords and double bass. So I start by improvising the chords, and when I can hear that this could be something, I experiment with some ideas, and then I played around with some counter movements. And these are very basic counterpoint principles. And everything I'm doing essentially is focusing on the basics. And I'm going to come back to what I mean about the basics in a moment. But it's a very simple sketch. But I can already tell that this is something I would like to work on. And then the only thing I'm doing from that point is starting to reinforce. I'm doubling down. I'm adding another octave in the melody. You can never really go wrong with octaves, whether in melodies or in the bass, because the octaves are literally reinforcing the overtones of each other, becoming almost like one entity to our brains based on the way that we're processing sound. This is a bit nerdy, but I love these kind of psychological and scientific reasons why our brains process things, which is a big part of the Cinematic Music Adventures course, especially the fundamental pillars that we go through in the first two modules. We go really deeply into why certain things work, the fundamental elements of music. This is inspired by Quincy Jones, rest in peace, sadly passed away a few days ago. Absolutely incredible mind and creative person. Really recommend reading his book, which I've been reading recently. He talks about music having two parts, science and soul. The science is the craft part, which is kind of undeniable. There's overtone harmonic series. There are ways that our brains process audio and sound that has been shaped through evolution in so many ways that really shape the way that we perceive music, and also shapes the way that we then have to organize and present our musical ideas in a way for it to be pleasing. And that's why octaves sound so great, because it doesn't interfere with our brain's ability to identify what is happening. Versus if we have a lot of conflicting things, our brain is not really it's gonna batch it all together as one noise, because it can't really identify the pieces from each other. And knowing the difference between these things and how to apply that to different musical settings is, in my opinion, paramount to becoming a good arranger and a good composer and even producer, because everything in almost all of the mixing really comes down to these decisions. So this is something I spend a lot of time kind of simplifying into a fun, approachable way in the course, not really getting too scientific or serious about it, but looking at the reason why things are the way they are. So when I'm talking about fundamental pillars and the basics, I'm not talking about beginner topics, things that are boring, things that are stale. I'm talking about the fundamental reasons why things are the way they are, and the building blocks of things. Like in painting, I guess Wally can chime in with what these are for painting, but things like composition, shapes, lighting, color theory, and so on. Mastering those things, they're very basic and fundamental, but are also some of the hardest things to master. Another book that I really like on cooking is Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, I think, in some kind of order. Really great way to look at cooking. These fundamental pillars that if you master them, you can master the kitchen, as the book says, by focusing on these cornerstones. It's a Pareto principle thing. The 20% of elements that make up 80% of the results, just like with those sketches we looked at here. This is probably just 20% of the actual work or into the whole workflow, but it makes up 80% of the result, getting these shadings and the shapes and trying to convey as much as possible with as little as you can. So I like to think about that in musical terms as well. And that's what I'm keeping in mind as I'm composing. I'm trying to think in those core musical pillars, but also figure out how can I get a good background, foreground, and middle ground and make the most out of that. So once I have these core building blocks with a melody, some chords, a counter melody, I realize that there's nothing really going on in the background. And that's why I'm thinking, okay, this might be a good place to have some flourishes in the woodwinds. They come out of necessity, not because I think I need woodwinds for any other reason, that they're a good fit for the missing puzzle pieces based on the fundamental things I need to have in this recipe, essentially. And these were also sketched out really quickly. I'm painting with broad strokes, trying to get the main idea and energy. This is before I've gone in and done any extensive editing. This is all being improvised in one take for 3 minutes, and then, as I say, my challenge is just doing a melody over every single part that kind of works, and I have to just stick with what's happening. Let me go into the comments really quickly as well. Barry, I'm happy you enjoyed the platform. And Quingy is asking, do I process the high strings, or if is this how they sound without anything? Well, they ideally probably don't sound like this. If you go to YouTube, you can listen to the full quality version. It's the last thing I uploaded before the trailer, Lord of the Rings inspired sketch, if the audio is subpar on this. But this is essentially the only thing I've done on this, just a little bit of Pro Q. Again, this is also a sketching broad strokes kind of thing. But I'm taking out a lot of the harsh kind of 2-3K area, a little bit in the 1K area, and taking out some of the lows. And I'm dialing this in more when I'm doing complete tracks and going more in depth in the polishing stage. But as I'm writing, I'm just setting this to a place where it's not annoying me. It sounds smooth, and it makes it inspiring to listen to as I'm working. But nothing more than just a little bit of Pro Q on this, and then I usually have a little bit of soothe sometimes on the string bus to get out some more harshness. And yeah, CSS is an amazing library as well. I'm in a Pacific Strings era of my life right now. I'm just really playing around with this. And Shordon, I don't know if I pronounce your name, Owen. Yeah, this is gonna replay later here on YouTube in the same link after this is done. Probably gonna keep going for another 15, 20, 25, 30. We'll see. And Frank William says, those flute runs are freaking awesome. Thank you. I really enjoy those kind of runs. I have them in most of my tracks that I write. I just love those kind of woodwind runs. And Brainformer says, interesting subconscious citations of Rowan theme, intro and other stuff. Yeah, definitely Rohan all over it. But I find it's really great to study those things and try to recreate them in your musical language, because it helps you kind of learn new skills and pick up new skills to put in your musical backpack, so to speak. Which is another way that we think in the Cinematic Music Adventures course. It's very inspired by games like Zelda, where you complete main quests and side quests and pick up skills that altogether stack up to, your end goal of completing the game. Um, and you have a main quest, which is like the big building blocks, and then a lot of smaller side quests that are not as essential to the big one, but it's going to help you pick up a lot of extra skills that will be tremendously beneficial down the line. And it's just a more gamified, fun approach to learning things that could be very theory heavy and a little bit boring to study. So this is a way that I learn, and like a lot better than something that is very theory heavy and boring. I love things that's practical, fun, and a bit gamified. So that's been a big way of looking at how to structure this course, which is very different to anything that I've seen in all my previous courses, and I'm really excited about it. And Stavros says, don't judge when you're improvising. I think you have to let it grow first. Absolutely. It's a massive point, super important, because when you judge when you're improvising, you're putting a barrier between you and the output of the idea. You're putting it into a box before it's even able to get out there and bloom. It's like judging if a seed is going to become a good plant before it's even sprouted. Like, you can't really do that. There was only one way to see if a tree is going to bear great fruits, and is to actually nurture it and then let it bloom and then make a decision. You can't shut it down before you've even started. And that's also one of the key parts of my workflow, which I call ignite, build, polish. In the first of those three stages, the ignition part, we're not even concerned by making anything good. We're just trying to make something. Again, we could make 10 ideas, we could make 3, or we could just make one long thing. But during this part, we're not even trying to be a little bit analytical or judgmental. We're just trying to do it, and then after the fact, we can go back and be picky, picking something out, deciding, do we want to turn this into full track, or do we want to move on to something else? And once we get to that part, the main objective is to get to full track structure so that we're not stuck on this really small loop and perfecting that. Because unless we get to full track structure, we're not really going to finish the composition. So that's the second main objective. And then once we have kind of a big picture thing like this is a small, shorter track, 3 or so minutes. But once I have this full journey, then I start to go into the polishing details, fixing the transitions, the MIDI, the mix, all the transitions, sound design, and so on. And then it's a lot more fun to do it as well, because you know that you have something here. You just need to kind of polish the edges a little bit. That's a workflow that is the heart of the new course. There's one module for each stage, and then we have 2 modules in the beginning for those fundamental pillars that are not limited to any style or genre, really going into the heart of how things work. And Notori says, difficult thing sometimes is being able to continue the piece even though it isn't particularly promising. Sometimes, especially as you improve, it becomes more difficult. You become more critical and you think more too much. Absolutely. I really relate to this, and I've found the self-judgment has become worse the more I learn and the better I become objectively. And this is something a lot of people that I've spoken to agree with. So I think the more we learn, the more it's also important to almost unlearn specific traits, or it's important to really practice not being judgmental, not overthinking, and having good systems and habits in place for finishing things and pushing through, and training the muscle of discipline and working through ideas and knowing how to actually turn them into full tracks and finishing them even if you're not feeling inspired. And Barry Walsh says, Aaron, where does most of your music end up being used? Very motif and lyrical, so is it used in TV shows? If I follow AABA formats, etc. It's a little bit all over the place. I have been experimenting with a lot of different things and done a lot of different work in a lot of different areas of the industry over the past years. Everything from music for trailers. A lot of it is TV, and some of it's being used in movies as well, advertising, music for libraries. Past years I've been working a lot with artists in LA. We're working with publishers there as well, with more lyrical music for advertising and libraries. But I also compose a lot of music just for fun. That's how I started as well, composing very lyrical soundtracks and putting them up on YouTube. That's what got me in touch with different publishers and people and friends and collaborators. So it depends, because I make a lot of different music. Right now we're tracking a rock album downstairs. I see they're ripping some guitar solos down in the main studio right now. And I'm about to join them in a little bit, because tomorrow is the last day and we have a whole album to complete. So I make a lot of different music and I love to explore different things. And one of the things that I've learned is that all of these fundamental principles and arranging principles and writing principles, they're all very universal in different styles. Yeah, there's so many similarities when it comes to those fundamental elements in the workflow. So my workflow when working with this kind of music is the same as when it comes to orchestral soundtracks. Michael, I'm glad you have learned something from this. Happy to help. I wish the audio was a little bit clearer here. I'm gonna look into this for the next time. Sometimes OBS is playing some tricks on me, but I hope that what I'm saying is making sense in this project regardless. And Brainform says, please name the book title and author again. It's Quincy Jones, 12 Notes on Life and Creativity. I'm pretty sure. I've personally been listening to the audiobook on Audible, which has been really great. Quingy says, I've been trying to copy Bleeding Fingers string sound, come to the conclusion that they use phasers to create extra harmonic. That's very interesting. I have not thought about that. It would be cool if you could post a link in the chat that I could check out. I could maybe ask Ansha. He might know what kind of crazy tricks they're pulling over there as he works there. But it's really good to try to copy a specific sound. That's one of the things I talked about with the study. Try to copy and mimic that sound in terms of the libraries that you pick, down to the way that you EQ everything, the way that you get the balance of the cellos versus the violins versus the brass and the strings and so on. And then you can focus one study on that and create a template that has that kind of sound in the end. And he said, I remember you using similar runs in a video seminar I saw a few years ago. Yeah, I've used this all the time, these kind of woodwind runs. Especially this patch right here in Albion Tundra. The shorts, they're not super realistic, but they're like in between a synth and a flute. They're supposed to be a flute, but there are more realistic libraries I'm using as well. I've used a lot of Opus, Hollywood Woodwinds for it, and Stress of Sophia, I think it's called Sophia Winds or Flutes or something like that. And Quingy says, it's hard to not polish as you go. I know, it's very, very hard, because I'm also a bit of a perfectionist, or very much so. I've had to train myself to kind of understand that the more I try to polish as I'm in the early stages, the more I'm kind of damaging myself. But another thing that really helps is spending a lot of time doing these studies so that you have a starting point where you don't really need to do much tweaking. Say when I'm doing these sketches, I'm not tweaking at all because I'm happy with the balance that I'm getting, because I've spent 3 days in a row just working on the template so that I can spend 30 days just pumping out ideas. And this is also not really fun work, but it's the kind of work that really makes you able to focus on the creative side 100% for a very long time, at least in that specific style. But it applies to a lot of things. When you do prepare properly, everything else becomes a lot smoother. And that's become my best strategy for avoiding having to tweak too much as I go, is making sure that very little tweaking is needed. And this comes from setting up the template, but also from being very meticulous in the fundamental principles in music when it comes to the counterpoint, the chord voicings, the separation of foreground, middle ground, and background between these elements, making sure that there's a good enough melody contour and shape in the dynamics, and so on. Like, all of these core fundamental pillars become even more important. So when I pair those, like a very intense focus on those pillars, mixed with a good template, I find that not a lot of tweaking is actually needed, and that frees me up a lot to focus on just pushing through and moving through a bigger sketch, even though I'm not feeling particularly inspired or I'm feeling a little bit stuck, if that makes sense. So one of the things I'm asking myself is, what is the essential things I need to get right in order for something to work or to be good? And in music, there's a few principles. Some of them are, the chord voicings, understanding properly how overtones work, how foreground, middle ground, and background work, how you can blend tone colors, different contexts and shapes and rhythms and so on. And then, of course, having a decent template helps a lot as well. But that's kind of more of a just a shape that these fundamentals take place in, or one of the ways that it helps you get those out. The most important thing is getting those fundamental things right, because if you just have one too many elements in a sketch like this in the low register, for example, that's causing clashing and a buildup of overtones, it's going to ruin the entire composition. Just one little mistake on these fundamental things. Quinji says, yeah, making a great low CPU RAM template sped up my workflow crazy. Yeah, I mean, I'm on a laptop right now, and I've been having this laptop for two years now. I think um, it, it's pretty powerful still, but these templates are running usually around 25 to 30% on the CPU. I don't really have any particular problems. I can record audio without a lot of latency. Um, it gets a little bit harder if I push 100 plus tracks with a lot of effects and things on it, but I find that it's so much faster to work, both in terms of the CPU load, but especially mentally having less elements to navigate and manage. And Barry Walsh says, you have to listen to composers the greats like Holtz and study the scores. Absolutely. That's one of the best ways to learn as well, and is what I did in the beginning. Even in high school, I used to bring scores with me in class, and I would get three different colors of markers, and I would color one color for the melody in the different instruments in the score, one color for the chords, and one color for the counter melodies, and try to categorize them into different, foreground, middle ground, background, and melody, counter melody, and harmony, and recognize those on paper and in the soundtracks. And I think that is one of the best things that I did for myself in order to understand these fundamental principles and how I could apply them in both orchestral music but also in other styles as well, because what I learned from that is universally applicable. Whether I'm working on electronic music, I'm working on beats with hip hop artists, or working on tracks for publishers for sync, or I'm working, with a rock band right now. And another thing that I find really important and helpful is that I focus on the big picture first, as I mentioned, and then details. So I try to work either horizontally, the big picture, or vertically. So previously, I've usually started with the vertical building blocks first, trying to get some chords, counter melodies, and melodies done. And then once I have a loop I'm happy with, I start to expand on that loop. But recently, in the sketches I've shared, including this one and the other one in the YouTube video, I've actually started with the horizontal development, just improvised a whole track journey on the go, sketching horizontally, and then going to the next level, sketching that horizontally, which is a very different way than sketching vertically. Um, and it gets a little bit rougher because I can't really spend too much time on each little block or each chord progression, but the tracks get less of a loop feeling. They're more dynamic. You can have easily more modulation between chords because you're not thinking in loops of 8 bars or 16 bars. And then once you get to the next section, that is 8 bars or 16 bars. You're kind of just thinking like a whole journey with, a build up, a middle part, a peak, and then, it keeps developing, and you're never really tied to a single key at all when you're sketching this way. So that's something that I've explored a lot more recently, which is a very different way of thinking, but I really enjoy it because you get more alive and dynamic tracks, very different to the more loop feeling tracks where it's like blocks parts of the tracks that are of equal um, length and feeling essentially. And yeah, so that's just something that I've realized recently. So I really recommend trying to work in this way as well. And we already talked about not caring too much as you go through this. And that's another great thing when I'm working this way horizontally, is that you have to just kind of keep going with it because you can't overthink every chord. And when I'm just recording it, whatever happens, happens. And one great thing with speed writing is that it's easier to not care as much because you're not putting a lot of time into each track or into each project. You're essentially just exploring them. It becomes a tool for musical exploration. You can visit 7 ideas in the span of an hour and see what this feels like, what this one feels like, almost like going to different worlds in a Zelda game, trying to visit them, teleporting over to here, and then eventually you'll figure out what you want to stick to. But it's nice to have that sense of exploration instead of feeling like this burden of having to finish something or feeling like you have to make this specific thing really great. And I think having more of a curiosity-based mindset when exploring is both great because you don't hinder yourself by being too judgmental, but also it really puts you in a mental space where you think, what if? What if this? What if that? And nothing is too stupid, nothing is too weird or bad or anything. It's a really good place to be creative, and I think that's where true creativity comes from. Yen says, I also reduced my template to the absolute minimal and essential tracks. It's so refreshing and it doesn't feel so cluttered. I really underestimated the danger of the huge templates. I did so too. And I had massive templates, and I, took pride in how big and complex my templates were, until all of a sudden I realized I dreaded almost starting new projects, and I didn't really know why. And I couldn't really find an explanation until I really just simplified everything, and it was like a light bulb went up for me, which is why I'm really kind of passionate about not trying to convert anyone to this way of working, but at least sharing the potential benefits if you feel overwhelmed or everything feels very chaotic and overwhelming as you're working. This is, really ideal, I think. Faru, great to see you. So you have to leave. You can watch the replay. I'll catch up with you later. And Quinji, yeah, you learn a lot by transcribing your favorite pieces and then storing concepts in your brain. And the best next step for me, at least, is once you have done that, once you've studied something or learned something, is try to create something using that information, which is a lot of the ways that we're doing the quests in Cinematic Music Adventures. Is we're learning something and then we're trying to explore it in our own musical language, because it's great to learn a piece of information or a technique, but I find the best results come when you take that and you try to create something with your own musical language, and then you really fully kind of internalize that concept. And Adrian asks if I have a musical degree. No, I do not. I am mostly self-taught, but I did study for a while at Berkeley online, did an orchestration certificate there while I was still in high school. And other than that, I had just been learning from others, self-taught, trying to study from really great people, and learned a lot by doing, by working in industry. This has been the only job and only thing I've ever really done since I was in high school. And music has been everything for me, and it's been an all-encompassing obsession, essentially, ever since I was very young. Quinji, workflow tips are honestly the best tips. Most people don't realize, but when you spend 12 hours per day, workflow becomes the number one thing to improve. I agree. I thought I needed to learn more and more and more tips and techniques, and realized what really helped me the most was focusing on workflow and habits, which is one of the big things I learned from when I was working with personal trainers, even in Australia. I started to really work on my fitness and my health, which really taught me cornerstone skills when it comes to building and forming and changing habits, and designing your environment to reflect the future and the habits that you want to facilitate, and the power of a lot of these things and how these rippled throughout my productivity, my time management, the way that I look at things, the way that I look at what's possible, and so on. And I feel when you look at workflow and things outside of music, they are tremendously powerful in the way that it affects your music and your musical output, and also the business side of things and the pace and speed of which you learn, and so on. That's awesome to hear, Barry. Yeah, Berkeley courses are great. And Quinn G says that's very interesting. Stopping bad habits is so hard. Yeah, it's really hard. It's a we're kind of wired to keep them going because they're comfortable. And there's a lot of things that I've learned outside of music that is very applicable in music, even when it comes to forming habits, and the different stages of habit transformation. I had this conversation with Walid a little while ago as well. Yeah, like the 5 stages. I'm not going to go in depth into this, but I'm a bit of a sucker for psychology and these principles. You have stage 1, stage 2, 3, 4, and 5. Stage 1 is when you're not even contemplating. It's pre-contemplative stage of change. You're not even contemplating changing an act or a habit. Number 2 is when you're thinking about it but haven't started. Number 3, you're preparing to change a habit. Number 4, you've started changing the habit. And number 5, you have been changing a habit for, say, 6 months and it's static. This could go for quitting smoking, starting to work out, creative habits, anything that is a good or bad habit in any way, or any change of behavior. And it's very interesting because none of that is fixed at any point. We're always fluctuating in different ways. And this is why I think Habits and Atomic Habits is a great book, and focusing on just tiny habits and tiny incremental changes, and focusing on momentum and consistency in anything that we're doing. Not really trying to overestimate what we can do in a week or in a day, but we shouldn't underestimate how much we can change, how much we can do in 1 year, 2 years, or 10 years when we compound the small things and small habits over time. And that goes for music as well. And Adrian, there's going to be one weekly call every Monday after the doors close on the 15th. We're going to start on the 18th, and then we're going to have a Monday call for each module that's being opened. There's 5 modules of the course. The first 2 is going to be launching on the 18th, and then we're going to go through each module each week. And the calls are, of course, optional. They are just a way for you to ask more questions, look into more specific areas, and get help with anything that you're stuck with. But they're not essential to do the course. So if people don't have time, it's not going to be a deal breaker for whether you're going to get a lot out of the course or not. Hey Flowey, good to see you. And Jens, I agree, Atomic Habits is an incredible book. It changed everything for me, the way I look at things outside of music, the things that how I look at music, my musical practice, how I learn skills, and so many things. Starting to have gone on for a while, and see my laptop is low on battery. I was gonna just go for about an hour, but got a little bit carried away. Let me know if you guys have any more questions or any things that you want to see in future YouTube videos, things I want to break down. I wish the audio was a little bit better. If there's anything more you want to see in this template really quickly, we can look at that. But I'm also going to make more videos on this in the future. I mostly wanted to speak a little bit about the mindsets and the way that you can set up these templates based on kind of what you need, and the steps of studying something, deleting it, making something, tweaking it, and deleting it again, and using that as a sketching template, and the mindsets to build out something and pushing through, not really being too judgmental, and focusing on the fundamental pillars of what's really important and understanding it on a universal level. These are things that you can study on your own, but if you really want a step-by-step handheld way that has been boiled down in kind of my methodology, I think you'd love Cinematic Music Adventures. And a great part is that you're also going to get the accountability of going through it with a group. You have a place to ask questions. You can join calls like this, ask more questions about anything that you're stuck with, ask for demonstrations, and so on. The doors are going to be open until the 15th of November, and then we're going to go through it for 4 weeks. But of course, you have lifetime access to the entire course, so if you don't have time right now to go in heavy and study and do the assignments every single week and do every single quest, and you want to do it over the Christmas time or something like that, that's completely fine as well. And you can of course ask questions in the group, and I will answer as quickly as I can and help out there. And you can always direct message me on the Evenant platform even after the program is over, if you have missed out on the calls and you're just working on it later. I want to make sure everyone gets as much value as possible out of the course, but we're keeping it open for just a week so that everyone can go through it together and everyone has the same starting point and there's not new people coming in constantly, because I want to make sure everyone is getting a good or the best experience possible, and I want to do my very best to facilitate that in this way. Said I heard from Mick Gordon to try to do weird Wednesdays. We try different approach, plug it in differently. I love that. Yeah, that's definitely a great way to work. I love trying weird things. That's actually one of the first things we're gonna do in this course. If you, some of you I know are already in there, but one of the first quests is based around that, trying to do something that's purposefully just super far out, just to see what lies on the other end. Start with curiosity, put away the perfectionist mindset, and actually try to be comfortable with just going with the flow and seeing maybe it turns out being completely stupid, the idea they want to try, but not being scared to do that and make that a habit, of going out there and trying weird things that might not work out. And Brainform asks regarding the course is for beginners. Just worrying if I should be keeping the pace with assignments. Yeah, so the pace I just addressed. You can take it at your own pace, and I will be here to help later as well. It's definitely beginner friendly, but it's not a complete beginner course, meaning that if you've never written a chord before and you don't really know how to install a sample library, we don't go through those things. But it's definitely beginner friendly in a way that we break down all the most fundamental principles. We're talking about foreground, middle ground, background, stacking and voicing big arrangements down to small chords, looking at how to create contour and shape of entire compositions, individual melodies, how to paint with different tone colors, how to create different contexts and orchestrations, how to build out entire tracks, coming up with ideas with 6 different ways, and looking at the whole creative process from a bird's eye view and going into every part of it. So it's definitely beginner friendly once you have gotten the very, very core basics down, which is not much needed. But hope that answers your question. But if you have any more questions, you can also just DM me on the platform or send me an email at arn@evenant.com. I'm gonna have to pop down and finish some of these takes, so we're not here until the middle of the night again. But I've had a great time chatting with you all, and I hope you got some value out of this talk. Let me know if there's any things you want me to cover in future videos. And if you have any questions about the course, you can always email me or send me a message on the platform, and I'll do my very best to figure out whether it's a great fit for you. Hey Brandon, thanks for tuning in. Thanks Stavros. Thanks Brainformer. Awesome to have you guys here. Thanks for showing up, and have a great Friday night, Friday morning for wherever you're tuning in from, whether it's America or Europe. See if I missed any last questions. I think that's everything. Perfect. Well, have a great night, day, or whatever you are, and hope to see you inside the course. Let me know if you have any questions or any suggestions for future content. I'll see you later.